Immortality, what a concept. I just want to say before I launch into my talk today that every aspect of immortality I'm going to touch on is like a springboard for another hour's worth of discussion, but I spent a lot of time restraining myself last night and this morning and making a few edits here and there. So I hope we finish on time. One of the first history lessons I remember took place in Orlando, Florida in the early 1960s. My second grade class studied Ponce de Leon, the Spanish explorer who traveled to our Sunshine State in search of a fabled fountain of youth, or the elixir of life, or so the legend goes. For some reason, Europeans expected magic and treasure in far-off lands. Perhaps they got weary of a narrow existence in their centuries-old culture. At any rate, they imagined vast riches, utopias, and sometimes even eternal life in the unexplored regions of the New World. After concentrating on Florida state history, we eventually learned about the ancient Egyptians and their ceremonial practices concerning death. We found the ideas of the pyramids, mummification, and physical preparation for a life after death. Well, this was all incredibly fascinating to us. Who wouldn't want to live forever with your treasured possessions, beloved pets, perhaps with a legion of servants, for all eternity? Especially when the stark finality of death and the idea that someday we won't even exist. That was too awful and hard to think about. Family offered comfort when we kids asked about death. In my particular case, we weren't really taught Christian doctrine. My parents took us to non-denominational Sunday school a handful of times one year. I think it was 1964, and it ran from just before Christmas to just after Easter. So the mass culture gave us the cartoon version of heaven, where we float in robes, wearing halos, and playing harps as we frolic among the clouds. Even a small child realizes that could become tiresome after a while. Of course, society also put forward the threat of the alternative fate, hell. We learned that it was all devil's heat and punishment, but that description at the time was somewhat vague compared to the option of paradise it counterbalanced. We'd have to wait a few years to hear the more dire, gruesome stories of a lake of fire and unending, unspeakable tortures. Both versions of eternal life seem painfully boring to our grammar school imaginations. Another way we learn to contemplate immortality is through fiction. Through books and movies, from Sleepy Hollow to Castle Dracula, from Dorian Gray to Dr. Frankenstein, a child could consider the implications of life after death, or what it might mean to avoid death entirely. It's fascinating to explore the world of ghosts, vampires, zombies, mummies, mutants, monsters, and just plain folks who somehow escape the finality of the grave. Science fiction serves up countless stories of how characters contend with the challenges of living forever. Spoiler alert, it doesn't always go well. It often concludes with people clamoring for death. The characters crave an end to a dreary, dismal, unsatisfying existence. We leave childhood, and our notions of immortality turn to the practical and metaphorical. We learn that human beings live eternally, in a sense, through their stories, their deeds, their works, their reputations, their contributions to society, and for what they meant to their loved ones still living. For a deeper dive, we rely on science and philosophy. Science does point us toward a kind of everlasting life. Biologists use the term immortal to describe various life forms that reproduce asexually through cell division and do not technically age and decay. Certain bacteria and yeast don't display generational differences in their DNA. Certain lines of cancer cells used in medical research, like the well-known and controversial Gila strain, harvested from Henrietta Lacks, with the proponents exercising dubious ethics. Embryonic stem cells and germs fall under this category. A species of jellyfish, in fact named the immortal jellyfish, rejuvenates after reaching sexual maturity. It then repairs and replicates its DNA and keeps thriving indefinitely. If we take some fantastical leap of bioengineering or mutation off the table, we can make the most of our physical selves through life extension. We understand the benefits of nutrition, exercise, safety, a sustainable environment, life-prolonging medicine, and reducing stress. The good news is many of us can adopt life extension practices and can control our destiny to a great degree. The bad news is that most of us on the planet are still victims of circumstances beyond our control. Too many of us are vulnerable to natural disaster, war, famine, despotism, misallocation of resources, and other misfortunes. Plus, ethical discussion of life extension warns us that the hyper-affluent, the billionaire set, will have exclusive access to resources denied to average citizens, the working class, and poor people. Of course, from pharaohs, kings, and high priests to robber barons, oligarchs, and plutocrats, the uber-privileged have always held the keys to the best medical care, scientific advances, and other life-enriching resources. The life extension movement ultimately raises other serious concerns. World population has more than doubled in my own lifetime. According to recent estimates, we reached 8 billion people within the last 2 years. The consensus of climate scientists is that we cannot sustain civilization using historical fossil-based energy resources. People around the globe seek the same medical care, transportation, comfort, consumer goods, and digital technology as those of us fortunate enough to live in affluent, developed countries. The energy demands for the existing world population is staggering. If we extend our longevity by 10 or 20%, how will we affect the quality of life worldwide? Add to that the pressures of a potential world population of 10 or 12 or 16 billion people. Today's global conflicts, from the humanitarian crisis on our southern border to the Israel-Palestine war to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, to the destruction taking place in Syria, Sudan, and other conflicts, they all affect the allocation of vital resources. On close inspection, many of these conflicts have the equitable distribution of water rights, minerals, and agricultural resources at their core. Military analysts cite resource wars as the predominant threat to international peace. We live longer while we continue to go forth and multiply. This will reshape public policy. France, notably, and other European countries are reevaluating the retirement age. This has resulted in mass demonstrations recently. China has rejected the one-child policy to contain the population. They're now working toward a 2.1-child policy to create a workforce that can support its own aging demographic. Immigration offers a possible future remedy to these social service crises. It must overcome, however, rising nationalism and toxic xenophobia. Those two unfortunate trends seem hard to subdue these days. Humanity needs all the compassion, justice, wisdom, and luck it can get to face these challenges. The vast majority of us mere mortals, up to now anyway, have been forced to accept that our physical lives are finite. Or as Thomas Hobbes put it in the 17th century, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So we constrain ourselves to contemplating our relatively brief individual spans of time. We try to give our limited existence meaning. We explore the earth, its skies, its oceans, and the heavens. We write books. We create music, sculpture, dance, painting, theater, and film. We take photographs and archive them into family albums. We forge tools and alter the landscape of this world. We work tirelessly to examine, understand, and ultimately solve problems like disease and famine. We band together in tribes, societies, and nations for mass survival. All these efforts outlive us to some degree. We pass down our cultural achievements from one generation to the next. We're currently obsessing over artificial intelligence, or AI for short. Entrepreneurs suggest that AI somehow offers the opportunity to gather a person's lifetime of recorded knowledge, writings, words, images, personality, and other aspects of existence into a permanent, undying technological structure, one that can interact in real time with living people. So far, I'm not too impressed. I recently watched a video of stand-up comedy created using AI. It's called, "I'm Glad I'm Dead." Let me be crystal clear. There's no creative genius I miss more than the late, great George Carlin. His razor-sharp insights, sheer wit, and side-splitting humor brought joy to so many of us. The video might seem fairly realistic to the casual listener, but I didn't argue with Kim when she said, "Turn that off." It reminded me of the time the TV drama The Sopranos used consumer-generated imagery, or CGI, to complete a story arc. It was after veteran actor Nancy Marchand died. I wasn't really watching the series at the time, but the phenomenon earned so much news coverage that I happened to watch that scene several times. I found that disturbing, and by that I mean the imagery itself, not the notion that someone's image could undergo such manipulation. It stalled somewhere between artificial and real. I later learned about the term uncanny valley. Raise your hand if you've heard of that term. It's when something isn't real enough, but so real that it's creepy. I haven't enjoyed much of that I've seen, whether or not it's resurrecting people or just creating animated humans who are supposed to look like real humans. But I'm much more comfortable letting Groucho Marx live forever in A Night at the Opera, or Marilyn Monroe immortalized in Some Like It Hot. As a practical matter, we achieve immortality in a metaphorical sense. We live on in other people's memory. If we subscribe to the idea of an afterlife as devotees of traditional world religions, then we imagine an eternal life that defies description in this world as we know it. Sigmund Freud the father of modern psychoanalysis, and a very attractive man, examined the human quest for immortality, particularly in his two critiques of religion, Totem and Taboo, and the future of an illusion. Freud suggests, without much subtlety, that the desire for both spiritual afterlife and a multi-generational legacy reflect a subconscious refusal to come to terms with the finality of death. To be fair, few of us human beings want to dwell on the uncomfortable fact that we do indeed die. Most of us thinking adults have accepted that fact, even if we'd prefer to procrastinate. We do write wills, buy funeral plans, and make our health care decisions and final wishes known to our loved ones. We arrange our bequests, even if it's something as simple as giving a shoebox full of baseball card collections to a grandkid. Those of you who know me well know that I don't expect to live on in any supernatural or otherworldly plane beyond my mortal self. As far as I'm concerned, one day this Energizer bunny will run out of juice, and I'm okay with that. Allow me to confess in public that succeeding generations will probably not see my name set in marble on a museum, a library, a medical tower, the wing of a university, or a government building, unless I win Powerball or something. I'm even avoiding the more affordable options. I won't have a burial plot or a headstone because, frankly, I don't really care about that. So how do I relate to the concept of immortality? Or to put it another way, how do I think about my own finite life? And what will happen after I die? And how do I hope to be remembered? Fortunately, I do have a unique resource at my disposal, and it's no secret. It's Unitarian Universalism. If I accept the challenge of our 7 principles, that's a great start. Embracing the humanity of absolutely everyone, everywhere, all the time, is a challenge, but my experience tells me it's worth doing. Using reason, justice, and democracy to solve disputes and create understanding, that takes time and effort, but again, it bears fruit. Studying the wisdom and practicing the disciplines of our ancestors and those of people in other cultures, that isn't always easy, but it does move us forward. And if I get better at practicing kindness and compassion, then my legacy will take care of itself. So I won't have to worry about what I leave behind. Anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you so much for your time and attention.